Welcome to People Love Process. We've all heard the old adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, in this movie, I want to revisit a style I first attempted when I worked at a small creative studio in the mid-1990s. We're going to use the exact same process I used back then. Why are we doing that? I wasn't even using Photoshop back then. But now we're going to use Photoshop to do it, but there's a certain part of this process we're going to stay in analog to pull it off because frankly, there's no reason to try to simulate it with like vector brushes or even Photoshop brushes. It's so much faster and more authentic if you do it by hand, and you're going to see that. So we'll once again be using Adobe Illustrator, though, as our staging ground for composing and creating our artwork. This is going to be a fun one, so let's dive right into it. We're first going to start in Photoshop because I want to create artwork based from a photograph. So this is Adobe stock image here of the Statue of Liberty. This is going to be our theme. The only thing I did is I cropped it because our composition is going to be really focused on Lady Liberty. And what is xerography, you might be asking? Well, I didn't come up with that term. That term I derived from what people called it back in the late 80s when I worked at one of my first jobs was at a sportswear company in Seattle. And we had create t-shirt designs and we use xerography. Xerography is taking photographic imagery, putting it on a copy machine and making a copy, taking that copy and making a copy of that and doing it about 10 generations. And as you do that, it breaks up that photographic image into a distinctly black and white image. It's how the legendary designer from Seattle, Art Chantry, created a lot of his punk rock posters back in the day. That's the process he used before digital even came on the scene. We just adopted that same methodology to create t-shirt art back then, but it works really well. And so I figured out how to simulate the same look and feel in Photoshop, and I want to walk you through that now. Now, it's 5 stages I'm going to take you through in live time. This took me maybe 2.5 hours, and I don't want the video to be that long, so I've kind of broken it down to explain it stage by stage as I go. It's a very give and take process. Like you blow it out, then you add some detail back in, and then you blow it out again, and it's almost like I'm trying to Xerox a previous copy of the artwork. So let's go through that. So this is the stock image. And the first thing I do is we don't want the background. We don't want any scenery in it in terms of the skyline. So this is where I'll just use the masked area to cut it out here. So that's all I'm going to do is select this, select the level with the layer with the photograph on it, and we'll just go Command J. And that's how I get a cutout like this from Lady Liberty. Now, I don't like how the arm goes off here. I wanted it to kind of trail off, so I'm going to do a little bit artistic prerogative and just make that arm look like it's going more to the left here. And I'll turn this on. You can see how I've edited out where it's just, you don't see that. It'll just look better, I think, in the composition. The next thing I'm going to do, we're working in RGB, so I want this to be black and white because the copy machines we use weren't color copy machines. I actually tried to do this several years ago where I went on to Craigslist and I bought an old copy machine, but it wasn't old enough. It was still too new and too good, and I couldn't get textures from it or do xerography with it. It was just too good a quality. I went to a copy place that sells copy machines, and I knew the guy who owned it, and I said, hey, do you ever get old, really bad drum-based copy machines? And he goes, oh, yeah, all the time, especially from the government, he said. I go, well, next time you get one, can you save it and call me? Because I'll just take it off your hands for you. I just want a machine that makes really bad copies. And he just looks at me like, what? And I tried to explain it to him. He didn't really get it. He never has called me, so I still don't have my hands on one. But we're going to turn this into black and white using a layer effect here. And this is just so we can blow out the contrast. And this is where I'll go to levels and I'll just start blowing out the contrast because I want to create a dark, dark and white highlighted areas. So this is what I do for the first stage. On the second stage, I start from where I left off on the first stage here. But the first thing I want to do, I don't want a background, but I want some things in the background, but I don't want it to be buildings or anything like that. I want texture. This is where I go grab another source texture that I have, and this is actually a copy machine texture derived from a copy machine, Xeroxing the sky, if you will. Nothing placed on the bed to copy, just copying the sky. And when you break that up after each generation of a copy, you get a really cool texture. So you can see where the lights hit it here, and these are the darker areas, and it just makes a cool texture. So I'm going to use this texture just to add a little more interest to the background here. But I still think this needs to be adjusted. So this is where I would go to the layers again, levels again, and blow it out a little more. Then I would add that texture in, and I like how it adds it a little bit speckling and within the body of Lady Liberty, but I don't want this much in the face, so I'll go back in using the same texture, but applying it white over the top just to knock out areas, just so you have some nice grittiness going on. And then, as I was looking at the side of her, I think this is her hair, and the shoulder, I didn't want it that dark down here. I want the focus to be on the face, so I add more of that kind of Xerox texture, but white, just to knock out those areas like this. Then I'll go back in, I'll add a little more midtones, back into this. Once again, it's a give and take process, and then I want to adjust the face again. And you can see here where I just focused on an area of the face. It's not the full image, just to slightly darken some of that, because I think that's going to help. And then I blow it out again with levels, so I get to this point. So this is just one stage upon another. This is the second stage. We'll go to the third stage, and the third stage, once again, picks up where we left off here. And this is where I want to add some more fine speckling. And we're going to do that here by putting the speckling on top of her. But first, this is in a mask. Let's go ahead and turn on this level first. This is fine speckling. This is just getting more artifacts into the background and over the top. I think that looks good. Here's a little larger specks we added. Once again, in the background, some on top. And then this is where I masked the original Xerox texture within Lady Liberty mask, so it only applies here. I go back in with more white speckles on top. I want to break up the heart edge on the left side, and on the bottom I don't want that being perfectly straight, so this is where I go back in using those same Xerox texture just to apply white to those areas. Add some more speckles. These are the source speckles, that is, for the larger ones. Here's more source speckles that are white that I've used in down below. So I get it to this point. And you might be thinking, well, it's getting a little dark. Well, it's because I'm going to blow it out even more, and you need that gray value in there. Otherwise, it'll degrade the dark black, which you want to kind of retain. So it's a trial and error kind of process. And this is what I thought would look good. So let's jump to the next stage. And this is where I'm going to use a feature in Photoshop that you might not be aware of. And I discovered this years ago because it kind of simulates a really bad copy machine. So if we just click on high pass here, you can see how it looks like those copies that you get on a really bad copy machine where it's not dark. And this is what we're going to use here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to punch in a number. And I already have this number figured out, so you can see what we get here. This is what it was, and then with the radius at 185, this is what we get. And it kind of looks like what you might see on a Xerox machine, a bad Xerox machine, if you blow it out. But I think that's going to work good. If we go here and turn on these light areas, this is where I'm just blowing out more of those areas. I'll go back to levels, and I'll adjust it even more. And this is really blowing out all the imagery within Lady Liberty herself, but the background still has the gray, which we don't want. So I go ahead and select those areas and blow this out. And this is now starting to look like that kind of guerrilla street art that Art Chantry would create, but it's still a little too fine. It's still a little too perfect. I want it a little more, I don't know if chunky is the right word, but kind of thicker in terms of these specs. And this is where it gets a bit counterintuitive. So let's go ahead and open up stage 5 here, and we'll continue from there. So we're at the same process here, and this is where, once again, it's going to be a little weird, because what we're going to do now is we're going to take this image and we're going to Gaussian blur it. So I'm going to go to Filter, go to Blur, go to Gaussian blur. And on this, we don't want 15. That's way too much. We want just 1. All we're doing is we're ever so slightly adding some beefiness to all the specs that are within this, all the artwork. Everything black now has some artifacting of gray around it because we blurred it. That's what we want. Then we'll go ahead to go to levels, and we'll just blow that out to get rid of some of that gray, but to retain this nice kind of chunkiness we have going now. Here's the next stage where I adjusted it even more and darkened it. I think this looks even better. And to improve the detail, there's areas that I didn't like, so I go in and modify it, like in the eye here. It looks like she is almost crying, so I went in and kind of edited that so it looks better. I usually set this aside or focus on something else, come back to it, look at it, and go, you know what, it'd look even better if I just clean up those areas, get rid of those big splotches. I don't like how you can't see the background down here where her hair is, so I improve that. And then I realized I really don't want all these specks out here. I want the thing sticking furthest out will be her crown, so I go ahead and edit all that. And this is looking really, really good, to the point where I get to what I call my final Liberty Xerography, which is this here. And this is, if you compare it to the original, here's where we end up with our xerography process and compared to the original photo. So very photographic, continuous tone, color, broken down into simple black and white. And I would save this out as a bitmap TIFF image, because a bitmap TIFF image, when you place it into Illustrator, as you're going to see in a few seconds, the white areas, the white pixels, that is, come in as transparent inside Illustrator. So let's go ahead and switch over to Illustrator, and I'll walk you through the rest of the process. And we'll go ahead. Here we're in Illustrator. Once again, this was our source photo. This is our Lady Liberty bitmap TIFF that I created in Photoshop. If I select it, by default, a TIFF image will be no fill, no stroke. Once again, the background is transparent. It's white pixels. So if you apply a color to it, if we apply red, it'll apply to the black pixels only. But we're not going to do that. We're going to apply a process black. If I double click in this, it's just 40, 20, 20, 10. I think it works. I use this all the time for illustration and for certain design projects, but on this one, it's going to work really well because we're going to have a lot of color interacting with it, and that'll ensure that that black stays nice and deep black when it's printed. But just to show you, if you're not familiar with using TIFFs, bitmap TIFFs within Illustrator, if I go ahead and copy this and just paste it, Command B behind the TIFF, you can see it's transparent in everything white. Now, you might see these lines show up. That's just a redraw thing in Illustrator. If you zoom in, those aren't there. But you can see how nice it looks when you zoom in on it. It's very organic, and that's why I wanted to establish the base art for this that way. So now that we have that set, I want to show you the inspiration for this project, because this goes back once again to around, I believe it was the early 90s. I don't remember the exact year, but the client at that time, I worked for a small design firm here in Oregon, called Adamson Design Group, and one of our clients was Crazy Shirts. They're based out of Hawaii. That's where they started. They're still there. But at the time, they were growing and opening up new locations in tourist kind of hotspots around the country. And one of them was New York City. And they hired us to create all these New York City designs. And I came up with the idea of, hey, what if I do a nice Lady Liberty kind of Warhol style? And this was the design I created. And back then, we weren't using Photoshop to do any of this. Like I said previously, Photoshop at that time only had one layer. It was pretty barbaric compared to Photoshop now. So I created this by taking a photographic source, Xeroxing it, or copying it, that is, and then copying that copy until it's like 10 generations from the original, and it would break up like this. But back then, I would go in with just printed, and we would go ahead and take one of those copies of the 10th generation copy, and I would physically ink on it with a Papermate flare pen. So that's how I did most of the detailing kind of on the side here. This was all drawn just to simulate xerography. And we also touched up on the face just to make it look a little better, some details around here. And this was okay. And then I was going, well, how am I going to pull off the kind of painted look? And then I thought, why don't I just paint it? And that's what I did. And then I just saved them as bitmap TIFFs, placed them in. At that time, it wasn't even Illustrator I was using. I was using my macro. No, it wasn't even Macromedia freehand. They hadn't been bought out yet. So it was Aldus freehand. And now is where I want to show you how you can do the painting, taking the artwork we created in Photoshop. I print this out, and now I'm physically going to paint out and separate all the color that I'm going to use in this design. And that's the process I want to show you next. So once I get my xerography figured out, I print it out physically like this. I'm going to be using black acrylic paint, a little bit of water, just water it down. And then I'm on top of my light pad here. It's about 3/8 of an inch tall. I can illuminate it. And then I just put a sheet over the top. And so all I have to do is turn on the light in the background. That way I can see my reference underneath. And I just grab the paintbrush here and I just start painting just to get the area I want to cover. And then this is what I'll take into Photoshop, and I'll go ahead and blow out and create a bitmap TIFF. And I do that for all the various colors, and they're separated almost like manually, like a screen print. So I just wanted to give you kind of a, an analog view of how I handle this process. It's not hard. Anybody can do this, and it works great. And it looks more authentic because I'm doing it by hand. I'm not using a brush to simulate the look. So just wanted to give you a kind of a behind-the-scenes shot of this process. So as you can see, the painting process isn't difficult. It's not hard. It's actually kind of fun because you can experiment. If you don't like something, just put down a new sheet on top and try it again. And that's how I painted out all the coloring I'm now going to walk you through. But once you have those painted out, you'll want to scan each of them in using a flatbed scanner. And this is why a flatbed scanner is so great for the creative process. You can make textures from it. You can do things like this where you physically paint something or draw something, scan it in, and boom, you have your asset ready to go. Now, I scanned them in, then took them into Photoshop, adjust the contrast, and saved it out as a bitmap TIFF image. And now we're going to put these to use to compose our final design. Now, the first color I'm going to do is the red color that I painted out here. So here's the bitmap TIFF. Once again, a bitmap TIFF is no fill, no stroke. This one's going to be red. And all we're going to do is we're going to align it to our artboard here. So I'll do that. And because I painted it out at the exact size my bitmap TIFF is for Lady Liberty Xerography, I don't have to really register it. There's not a lot of one, it's a very loose registration because it's painted, but it makes it super easy. I don't have to scale anything. It's already at 100%. That's the other reason why I did it. Even back in the 90s, I did it that way for that very reason. So I didn't even change that part of the process, but I think that looks awesome. Let's take a look at another one. This is one I painted out. Let's go ahead and select that layer. This is going to be purple, and we're just going to apply the purple color to that. Look how beautiful that looks. We'll turn on this one. This is going to be blue, so we'll select that layer, and we'll color it blue. And this is mostly to give the detailing on Lady Liberty herself. Then we'll turn on this one. This is going to be yellow. We'll select that layer and we'll punch in yellow. And I think that looks really, really nice. Now, the other aspect is I added in my original, if you look at it, was this kind of halftone. It really kind of gives that Andy Warhol vibe. So that's what we're going to turn on here. It's the same halftone. This is vector. Everything up to this point is bitmaps. We can go ahead and lock these like that. So that's going to work great. We have that. And the last bit to really push it over the top and give it that Warhol vibe is he would do gesture drawings on top of his paintings. And that's what I wanted to do on this. I had it on the original one that I was inspired to create. And by the way, my old boss, he had this printed out 4 feet by 4 feet, and it was always up in his studio. And about 3 or 4 years ago, he sold his design firm to a company down in Arizona. And he called me up. He said, "Hey, Vaughn, you know that Lady Liberty print that you did that I have up on my wall?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "If you want it, it's yours." And so I drove down to his old office, picked it up, and now it's hanging in my studio. So that's kind of cool. So now I want to get that same loose gesture drawing on top that I had in the original. And that's where I'll just print this out. And on top of it, using my light pad that you saw me paint on top of with the paper separations, this is just the gesture drawing that I really quickly squiggled out, knowing that these are super simple to create because all I'm going to do is I'm going to just build vector-based strokes like this. And all of these strokes, we'll go ahead and select these strokes here. All of these are going to have the same exact look and feel, which is green. So I'll turn this on, make sure that we have a nice round cap on those. And I think that really makes it look nice and authentic, like a Warhol, having those into it, those added in. Now, of course, our tonal family is just simply these 6 colors. And what's nice about this style is it works great for t-shirts. Meaning, if I want to print this on black and use exactly what I showed you here, this is what it'd look like. And you go, well, that doesn't look good. Well, it looks great if you just remember to also paint out a level or detail separation that will be the white. So if I turn on this layer, I did that. I actually painted out what I could turn white so I could do it on a white or dark background. So now, whether you're printing on white t-shirts or light colored t-shirts or a black colored t-shirt, this style is going to work great. Now, the reason why I decided to put this together isn't just thinking about the past. It's because one of my clients, Street to Street, they do youth outreach in New York City and put on basketball camps for kids. And they are completely a nonprofit, and they have investors who invest in what they're doing because they're positively affecting kids' lives. And so they wanted to give something to those donors who donate money to help them run what they do. And so they approached me and said, "Hey, Vaughn, could you help us develop a line of New York-based designs?" And I said, "Sure." And so this was one of them that I thought of. I go, oh, I need to redo my Warhol Lady of Liberty and do one for them that they could either have these printed out as nice prints on some uncoated stock that looks really great, or do t-shirts. And this is what they're going to give to anybody who supports their outreach and helps their nonprofit run. So I thought that was cool. And I create a bunch of other really cool designs for that project. And I might feature one of them in an upcoming People of Process movie. Now, one thing I tried on this one, and I tried, maybe I could add a nice little logo type. It's not bad. It might be okay if it was a poster, but I thought on a shirt, it's just better just to keep it clean and mean, kind of like this. So a fun process to create a Warhol-inspired design that's going to work great for screen printing. It's going to work great if you want to print it out on, once again, there's a great printer out in New York called Cat Prints. My daughter turned me on to them, and I've done prints with them on really nice linen, heavyweight, uncoated stock, and it looks beautiful. And this is going to work great for that. A longtime client of mine, Street to Street, was the ones who are now using this. And I can't wait to get a t-shirt once they do get this printed. Overall, this was one of 6 designs I developed for their New York City line. I encourage you to give this method a try, embrace the analog workflows, and have fun with it. Now, your theme doesn't have to be the Statue of Liberty. Think of Andy Warhol did portraits of Marilyn Monroe, of Campbell Soup, but he used that xerography kind of look and feel, and you can pull that off too. So just think of a theme that you like and give this a try. I think you're going to have fun with it. It's important to learn new things and adapt to be more efficient, of course, but just because something is old doesn't mean it has to change. Just approach it with new knowledge and workflows and keep leveraging it creatively. Remember, the exercise files for each of my People of Process movies can always be accessed via a link in the description below this video. A big thank you to those who have and to those who have also become members as well. You help me to continue making content for this channel, and I appreciate your support. I really, really do. Until next time, thank you for watching People of Process. And as always, I hope this content helps you to improve your own creative process.